My search to identify the greatest film of all time has now reached 1979. Yep, it's time to close out the 70s. Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1979, or at least the ones that I've seen. Now, the other day when I started to plan this video, I realised that I'd seen 9 films from this particular year, but over the past week I have watched an additional 4 movies, which takes the total today up to 13, a respectable total. It equals the record amount of films previously set by 1978. And let me also say that there is not a bad film on this list today. This is definitely the highest quality rankings I think I've done in this series so far. The film which comes bottom today is really unlucky to just happen to have come out in 79, because there's no weak film in 79 that I've personally ever seen. It's pretty weird, because usually when I do this list, some of the films near the bottom tend to be a bit dodgy, but not today. It's good quality all the way through. Now, a quick reminder that the top film today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films later down the line, where I will be crowning the greatest film of all time. And the film which comes second today may also end up in that final, numbers permitting. I suspect that roughly 80% of the films which come second in these rankings will go through, and I'll probably have to crop about 20% of those second placed films out, so there will be some unlucky ones, but most of the films which come second will end up in the final. Right, enough waffle, let's get into it and find out what is my 13th favourite film that came out in 1979. This is a British film about how teenagers used to be sent to borstal schools back in the 70s and 80s. They were like prisons for teenagers, basically. We don't have them anymore. If we do, they're extremely watered down compared to what they used to be. In the past, they were very, very nasty places where lots of bad stuff happened in them. And in this film, we get to see some of the grim realities that faced teenagers who had to go to borstal schools, as I think they were called. My mum just used to call it Borstal as if it was like one big institution. She used to say, if you don't improve your behaviour, you'll be sent to Borstal. You know, that was a common threat that parents would tell their kids back in those days. But you couldn't actually just send your kids to Borstal. They would have to commit a crime, if you see what I mean. This film is a very hard watch. There's no humour in this film. We see some extremely unpleasant things happening to some of these teenagers, and they're not bad kids, really. You know, they might have shoplifted or something, and then they've ended up in these places for like 2 or 3 year stretches. We get to see a male rape in this film, which is not nice to watch. There's one kid who cuts his own wrist and dies. And yeah, it's a really tough, bleak drama, a very high quality one. I watched it twice back in the noughties. I've never gone back to it since. I don't think I ever will again. It's not that type of movie really, but it's still pretty good for what it is. And presumably this is what life was like for kids who got sent away back in the olden days. Ray Winstone's in this film, a very, very early role for him. He plays the main thug, who's one of the nicer characters. And there's a character called Archer, who's like this really posh guy who for some reason has ended up in Borstal. He's sort of like the comic relief. It's a pretty decent film for a bottom placed film on the ranking, it has to be said. I know, one of the all-time great war films, only coming number 12 in today's ranking, but I must reiterate, all the films today are very good. I watched this for the first time just the other night. Now, there's 3 different versions available for this. There's the theatrical cut, which is roughly 150 minutes. There's the final cut, which is the one that I watched. It's the version that's available on Sky TV. That's 180 minutes, roughly, so 3 hours pretty much. And then if you buy a certain Blu-ray, there's something called the Redux cut, which is about 214 minutes. So I watched the kind of middle ground version in terms of length, and I was really enjoying this film until the point where Martin Sheen, on this boat that he's on, gets to a dock, and there's all these Frenchmen there, and they go back to this French house, sort of inland, and the film just ground to a halt at this point for about 10 minutes. I found myself losing interest for a while. I wonder if this segment was added back in for the longer version, because it did feel a little bit like filler. The ending was something I had a problem with as well. This Colonel Kurtz character had been built up throughout the film as this really amazing military man who was going to be a real adversary for Martin Sheen, and actually he turned out to be a bit of a disappointment. I mean, the entire ending with the cult, it felt like something out of a bad horror film, and I wanted a really good confrontation to end the movie, something like the end of Heat or something. So I didn't like the ending, and sadly, I imagine that no matter which version of this film you watch, the ending is pretty much going to be the same in all three. Although I would be open to watching the film again. If I did, I would definitely try one of those other versions, the theatrical or the Redux. The bit where Robert Duvall's character leads that assault on the Vietnamese village and he plays that classical music, I really enjoyed that part. Now, a few years ago, I played a PS4 game called Far Cry 3, and the last mission in the game, you have to steal this attack chopper and start shooting loads of enemies from up high to that classical music. I didn't realise when I was playing that it was basically ripping off this scene from Apocalypse Now, so that's kind of funny when I look back on it. So today we have our first Star Trek movie. I quite like the Star Trek films. I'm not like a massive fan. I've seen lots of the ones that have the original crew in them, 1 to 6. I've not seen a lot of the ones after that, the ones involving Picard and the reboot onwards. I always mean to get onto those and I don't really get onto them ultimately. But these original crew ones I've seen many times throughout my life. I'm pretty sure I've seen the motion picture at least 3 times, probably in the last 10 years alone. I do think it's a good film. It's a bit slow and meandering. I think a lot of people don't like it for that reason. Originally, I believe it was meant to be an extended episode for a new run of the original series being put back on TV, and then they changed it. They changed the script to make it a movie, and that's why it doesn't actually feel like a movie, this one. But it's good. If you've got the patience for it, it's still a good watch. It's quite creepy in places, actually. Um, but it is slightly too long. There's one scene where Kirk and Scotty are traveling on a pod to get onto the Enterprise, and they're gazing up at the Enterprise, and it goes on forever. It's like 6, 7 minutes, this scene, when it just needed to be about a minute. I mean, it's pretty bad, but the movie as a whole, I think, is a decent film for its time, 1979, although they would never make a Star Trek film quite like this one ever again. I think the acid test when it comes to Star Trek in this ranking series is how The Wrath of Khan does, because that's always been my favourite Star Trek film. So if that doesn't do very well in the whatever year the ranking will be for that one, then I think we can safely say at that point that probably there won't be any Star Trek films going into the grand final. I suspect there won't be, if I'm going to be completely honest. This one today only comes 11th out of 13. This is another British film, and similar to Scum, it's about teenagers and the angst that they feel when they're growing up, except in this case, it's outside of a prison setting. Phil Daniels plays the lead. He's a very charismatic British actor. He was in EastEnders for a while, and back in the day, he sang a lot of the lyrics on the Blur song Part Life, if you're familiar with that. Leslie Ash is in this film as well. She went on to be Deborah in a UK sitcom called Men Behaving Badly, which was very famous in the UK in the 90s. And I've no idea what's happened to her in the last 20 years, whether she still acts or not, but I can't remember seeing her in anything since Men Behaving Badly. This film is at times a bit of a grueling watch, but it's nowhere near as depressing as Scum. I haven't seen it for a long time. I do remember the ending where the main character throws his moped off Dover cliffs, and I think that's meant to be a kind of transitional moment from teenager to man, the moment where you decide to just leave the gangs behind and finally decide to grow up and stuff. I don't know, it's been a long time now. Although if I had to go back to either Quadrophenia or Scum, it would probably be this one, Quadrophenia, because like I said, it's definitely a lot less depressing than watching Scum, but it is definitely recommended. It's a good film, this. So only number 9 for one of the great film experiences from my youth. I can't remember exactly when it was. I was 8, 9, 10, roughly that age, but I was staying in London with some relatives, and I went to bed on such a high after watching Rocky take down Apollo. It was brilliant. It was my first experience of watching this character, and I absolutely loved it. But I'll say the same thing again about Rocky that I said about Star Wars and Star Trek. Even though I really like these franchises, I'm just not sure if any of the individual films from those series will do well enough to get through to the grand final because of this format and how it's set up. Only ninth today for Rocky 2, and yet I do really like it. The original Rocky film came fourth in my 1976 rankings, which is obviously a lot better than ninth, but I think the competition was a lot weaker in 76 than it is today in 79. When I compare Rocky 1 and 2, it's quite close. I guess Rocky 2 doesn't have that awkward scene where Rocky forces Adrian to kiss him, but Rocky 1 is a lot more creative and original. Rocky 2 almost copies the first film, really. I mean, it's a repeat of what we've already seen, except this time Rocky wins, and there's a few progressive things going on in terms of the relationship between Rocky and Adrian. You know, they get married and have a kid, etc., etc. But it's still quite a samey sequel on the whole. I will quickly mention one of my favourite scenes in it, though, when Rocky does the commercial for cereal, I think it is, and he's like, in the morning. No, it's aftershave. I do apologise. In the morning, when I put it on, I smelled mainly. That is absolutely classic. So here we have our second prison film of the day, if you count Scum, and I definitely do, but this is my favourite of the two movies. It's just another good, solid, standalone effort from Clint Eastwood. We've had lots of films with him in them as we've been going through these 1970s films. This is about a bunch of guys who are trying to escape from Alcatraz prison at a time when there still was a prison on Alcatraz. It's got Fred Ward in it as well. He's not as good here as he would go on to be in Tremors, but he's still here. I like the ending to this. It kind of lets you make your own mind up about how the story finishes, but it works for me. And if you're into prison films, I think you'll like this. It's a really well made film. It doesn't do anything spectacular, but it's very well written. I've only seen it the one time. I think it might have been back when I was a teenager actually, but my memories of it are quite vivid. So give it a try if you've never seen it before. Escape from Alcatraz, highly recommended. This was one of my first time watches. I watched it just a couple of nights ago. Believe it or not, there are 26 movies in the Amityville series which actually have Amityville in their titles. It must be one of the longest running movie series in all history, although I think most of the films don't actually connect to each other. It's kind of weird. I will not be watching all 26, by the way, for these rankings. I deliberately went out and bought a copy of the first one because it's considered to be, you know, the classic Amityville film. It was a cinematic release. It had some big names in it. But as for the others, maybe one day I will do a review series for Amityville. That would be kind of fun. But I think there are lots of franchises I would rather do before then. I'd like to watch the second one. That's got Burt Young in it, apparently. Burt Young in a haunted house. I am sold. As for this first one, it's not a drag to watch, which I was surprised because it's 2 hours long. I thought, oh, is there going to be pacing issues? No, not at all. There are no deaths shoehorned in for the sake of it. It's just a good story. It's creepy at times. James Brolin and Margot Kidder do fantastic jobs in the lead roles. This is definitely the best I've seen from Margot Kidder. It's not her best film, but it's her best performance that I've ever seen her do. So call me a fan of the original Amityville film. I did really like it. We've arrived at the Mad Max films. I used to love these when I was growing up. I had the first three taped off the TV and I would regularly watch them over the years. This first one has, well, it's a fascinating backstory that leads to the events more in the second and third films, I think, than this one, because society still seems to be just about operating in the first Mad Max film, whereas in two and three, it's completely dissolved. I think there's meant to have been some kind of nuclear event in the world of Mad Max that has taken place overseas, and it's not directly affected Australia, but in time, I think the country has no longer been able to get supplies and things from abroad, so petrol starts to run out and food, etc., etc., and that's when society begins to fold in on itself and there's no police anymore, and then you get eventually to the situation in Mad Max 2. These films never outright come out and give you a clear picture of what's gone on in the outside world. There's a brief sort of montage at the beginning of Mad Max 2, I think, but it doesn't really go into detail as to, you know, how the world just completely goes to shit. But Mel Gibson as Max in all of these films is really, really good. You can totally see how he went on to become a big Hollywood star. There's some great villains in the first movie, Toad Cutter and Bubba Zanetti, and there's this weird guy called Johnny. I don't know why Johnny is just kept in such a high position in Toad Cutter's gang. I mean, he just makes cock up after cock up, and for some reason, Toad Cutter just keeps him there at the top of the hierarchy. I don't know why. Are they related or something? I don't get that part, but I love these movies, and the first one is right up there with. Well, I think Mad Max 2 is the best one, but it's quite a high bar all the way through, I think, and certainly the first one's not lagging behind when it comes to the quality, even though we haven't yet got to the kind of the really good stuff in the wasteland in Mad Max 2. There's some great quotes that you can do in this film as well. I love it when Max goes to the police station and his bold captain's like, "Come on, Max, we're going to give them back their heroes." Then there's the goose. "Don't ride off the goose till you see the box going into the hole." And then there's the Night Rider. Remember him when you see the night sky. Absolutely classic stuff. This was another one of my first time watches, and I'd never even heard of Phantasm until just last year when I heard more than one YouTuber randomly mention it during their various videos. And when I then looked into it, I realised that it's a big long series with 4 or 5 films in it, and I thought, how have I never heard of such a long running horror franchise that supposedly is actually quite good? So when it came to this 1979 video and I realised that Phantasm came out in 79, I went out and bought a copy of the original movie and watched it, and I had no idea what was going on in the first 20 minutes because I didn't really do any research into the story. I decided to just leave it as a surprise. All I knew going in is that there was some kind of old guy in it making zombies or something, which is not a lot of information. So I was totally confused during the first 15, 20 minutes, but the film really grew on me as it went on, and there's a really creepy atmosphere in this. If I'd have watched this film in my teens, it probably would have scared the crap out of me, but I really enjoyed the story. It had lots of good stuff in it, and I liked the twist at the end. I can imagine that not everybody liked how this film ended, but I thought it was great. And there's even a sort of secondary twist beyond that, which I'm not going to spoil here, but it would not surprise me if this film influenced Wes Craven when he came to sort of writing A Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't think he's ever actually come out and said that Phantasm was an influence for that, but there are definitely similarities there for me. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be watching Phantasm 2, 3, 4, or 5 in time for when those particular rankings will come around. At some point, I'd like to do a review series for this because I love how this has begun, because this original film is really good. So I guess I'll play it by ear. I've got 9 more rankings to think about whether I will do Phantasm 2, because I think the second one doesn't come out until 1988. So I will stew on that. But if you've never seen Phantasm and you like horror, by all means give it a try. It's a really original film, a clever film, great atmosphere, and I'm very pleased to be able to put it in the highly respectable position of 5th today. This is the highest placed of my first time watches. A lot of the first time watches have done very well in this rankings, apart from Apocalypse Now. All the horror ones have done really well. Amityville, Phantasm, this. I've discovered some really cool films over the past week, and this is the best of the bunch. I originally heard of it because, well, the actress Tanya Roberts sadly died quite recently in the last few months, and I heard a few people mention Tourist Trap as being one of her sort of really cool films from early on in her career, so I kind of kept it in mind. And then when we came to this 1979 rankings, I spotted it on the list of films on Wiki and thought, oh, ideal chance to actually go and watch Tourist Trap, seeing as a lot of people have been going on about it. So I did. I went out and bought it. Took a bit of a risk buying it on Blu-ray, having never seen it before, but it was a risk well taken because I really enjoyed it. It starts out a bit slow. First 10 minutes, I thought to myself, oh God, what am I watching here? But no, I totally grew into this film. It's really creepy. My brain was completely engaged past a certain point. The main villain in this, he has some kind of telekinesis power, and he makes mannequins and things and puts them all around his house and his sort of museum building thing that he's got as well. And he makes these mannequins move to make it appear to other people like they're moving by themselves, and it's a really effective idea for a horror film. Tanya Roberts is very good in it. I've only seen her in A View to a Kill and Beastmaster, mostly films from sort of the early to mid 80s. I'm not entirely sure what sort of career she had beyond those, but very sad to hear that she'd passed, and it's sort of cool to have gone back now and seen one more film with her in it. And if you're into horror, I definitely recommend Tourist Trap. It's a good watch. So we were just loosely talking about James Bond briefly when we mentioned Tanya Roberts being in A View to a Kill. Now we have an actual James Bond film on our ranking, Moonraker, a very divisive film among James Bond fans. I probably like it more than the average Bond fan, hence why it's so high on this list. It's not a favourite of my cousin's. He calls it his least favourite James Bond film in the entire series. He describes the space stuff in this as James Bond meets Button Moon. I think he's being a little bit harsh because this film came out in 1979. Obviously, it's a 1979 ranking. Special effects were not as good back then as they are now. But honestly, I like everything in this film that takes place in space. I think that part of it is just perfection to me. I love all the eerie music that plays when the characters lose the gravity and they have to sort of float around. The problems with this film come with its over reliance on humour and the fact that they bring Jaws back. Jaws was brilliant in The Spy Who Loved Me. He's bloody annoying and awful in this one. They should have not brought him back. They should have put a brand new henchman in there because he really brings this film down. And there's too much humour in Moonraker overall. There are little bits now and then, a lot of it to do with Jaws though, that I would take out. And if this film had just been touched up a little bit, it could have been one of the all-time great James Bond films, in my opinion. If this had been Roger Moore's last, I think it would have been a great way to go out. It's still a great film as far as I'm concerned. It's a good action adventure. It's got some great locations, a great pre-title sequence with Bond falling out of an aeroplane without a parachute, and then he ends up going to Venice and somewhere in Silicon Valley, I think it is, to Drax's mansion. The Brazil stuff looks amazing in this film, and the space stuff, for my money, is mostly very well done. And there's a great joke at the end of this film when Q says that Bond is attempting re-entry. So call me a Moonraker fan. It doesn't quite reach the grand final as The Spy Who Loved Me did by winning the 1977 ranking, but it came very, very close. So let's now find out which films will probably be going through to the grand final by coming first and second, starting with the film that is in second place. Warriors, come out to play. Warriors, come out to play. It was very, very close between The Warriors and Moonraker. I had to think for quite some time about which one to give the edge to. Ultimately, I went for The Warriors. I think it's more a perfect film for what it is, whereas with Moonraker, there are all sorts of surgical things I would do to that in an editing suite if I was given half the chance. But Warriors is a really cool film. I watched it for the first time back in the 90s. It's about a gang of youths who have to travel across New York State on foot, and they're being sort of hounded at every turn by loads of other gangs because of reasons I won't go into here. It would take me ages to describe the plot for this film, but it's really, really cool. It's sort of like a horror thriller. It's very unique, and it had a great VHS front cover back in the day. I'd never even heard of this film on the night that I rented it, and then I saw this amazing front cover which depicted like hundreds of thugs all standing in a group, and it just looked awesome. Talk about the front cover selling the movie. That I knew right in that second that was my movie for the night. So I got my dad to rent it for me because I was too young to take it to the counter back then, and really enjoyed it. And a couple of years later, I rented it again, this time with a couple of my friends over, and introduced the film to them, and we all had a good time watching it. It's never had a sequel or a remake. It doesn't really need one. And I think the trouble with ever trying to remake this film is the fact that it was barely believable, this plot, even in 1979. You know, it's not really a gang culture that I could imagine being a real thing. You know, everybody going around with kind of football type strips on and stuff, you know, gang colours. I'm not sure gangs work like that in real life or ever even did, but As a movie, this is absolutely awesome. It even got its own video game, I think, in the noughties on PS2, which I never got around to trying, but I heard that it wasn't bad. So yeah, the Warriors come second and may well end up in our grand final further down the line. Let's find out though which is my favourite film from 1979. And I think as soon as you see the still, you will understand straight away why this film is number one, because it is a beloved classic of cinema. Let's find out what it is. I'm a massive fan of the Aliens franchise. I got into these films around about 1990, 1991. At the time that I first started watching them, there were only two available to watch, Alien and Aliens. I distinctly remember driving past our local cinema and seeing Alien 3 up above the doors to the cinema and thinking to myself, oh God, why can't I be old enough to go and see that movie? In terms of the first film, it wasn't an immediate masterpiece with me. I kind of thought that it was just okay, because when you're a kid, you kind of prefer the action of Aliens, I think, rather than the slower burn of Alien. But as I've got older and I've rewatched the film over and over, I've just appreciated it more and more each time. And now I'm at the point where it's difficult for me to separate Alien and Aliens, because they're both absolute masterpieces as far as I'm concerned. I imagine a lot of fans of this series have a lot of trouble deciding which is their favourite out of the first two films. How many franchises can say that they start with two films like Alien and Aliens? Not just one, but two of them back to back. And a lot of credit with James Cameron for that in terms of the second Alien film, because he did exactly the same thing with the Terminator films, somehow managed to produce a masterpiece sequel to an already masterpiece first film. What increased my appreciation of Alien was playing the Alien Isolation video game as well, because playing that made me feel like I was literally a character in Alien trying to survive a xenomorph on this space station type thing as it is in Alien Isolation. It's an amazing game. Even if you're not into video games, really, give that a try if you like the Alien films, because it's my favourite video game of all time. And I've played a lot of video games, believe me. So Alien is an amazing film. I don't think I ever really thought that anything else from 1979 was going to beat this. I think this film could do very, very well in the grand final when we get there. It's going to be very, very interesting. So that's all for today. It's been a high quality ranking. I've been talking about lots of really cool films today. And I guess there is one more question left to ask. Only one. This is going to be a very short section today. It's normally a short section anyway, but all the films that I wanted to see in 1979 that I hadn't already seen, I went out and watched last week, really. There's just one left that I would really like to see, and that's Salem's Lot. It was a TV film originally, I believe, but you can buy it now on Blu-ray. It's like 3 hours long, but I really like the novel by Stephen King, so at some point I'd really like to get around to watching that. I'd like to do a Stephen King review series at some point, so I'm sort of sad that that's tacked on to the end of this video, not yet watched. It's, I should have watched that film really, but we've had a good rankings today. We've got two really high quality films going through to the final, and I guess I will be back to do my 1980 rankings very, very soon. Yes, we're heading into the 80s. I think the ranking lists are going to start to get longer, because I've definitely seen way more films from the 80s than the 70s. So until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.